Within consigned inventory, we start with a blanket purchase order. And so we will select the blanket purchase order screen and select to add a blanket purchase order. We identify the period of time that we expect to consume this material. So how long do we want this purchase order to actually stay open? And we'll identify that we want this to be open until the end of June 2011. We'll select our vendor here, and we'll also select that this is not only a blanket purchase order, but it's for consigned inventory. As we move down to add the lines to our purchase order, we can identify the items that we want to purchase. So we'll select that we are purchasing azalea bushes and that we want to have 1,000 of them brought over from the vendor to our facility, but we won't be taking ownership of them until we actually consume them as part of the consigned inventory agreement. So we'll save that line and go ahead and complete our blanket purchase order. Once that's been complete, we would be awaiting the receipt of those materials from our vendor at the time that they came in. Just like any other purchase order, we will do a material receipt, identify the vendor that we're receiving against, identify that this is a consigned receipt, and select to create the lines from a particular purchase order. In this case, we did purchase order 1005, so we will select that. It's for the 1,000 azaleas. If we received a different quantity at this point, we could identify that, but we'll go ahead and select the full quantity and mark this transaction as being complete. Now, one difference between a material receipt and a consigned purchase order as opposed to a regular purchase order is I cannot create any type of a receipt confirmation. I also cannot create an invoice in the accounts payable area for this receipt either. There's no financial transaction that has been taking place. We are simply noting that we have received the material and have put it into our consigned inventory. At this point, if I come over and look at my warehouse and locators, and we select to look at our U.S. distribution center, and we come down to our consigned location, which is this first one here, I can see on the storage tab that we have 1,000 azalea bushes showing up in here because the business partner associated with this location is Tree Farm. That's the one we've been using. As we've received things for Tree Farm, they've been automatically going into this consigned location for Tree Farm. Now that we are in a position where we have the materials, we can go ahead and start to use the materials, which would then at that point change the ownership from Tree Farm over to our company. So I'll select to do a consigned inventory transfer. The consigned inventory transfer is just a simple process that will allow me to move the material out of consigned inventory and into an actual locator, at which point we also will take ownership, so there are financial transactions associated with this. We'll select to add a transaction. We'll select that it is a consigned inventory transfer, and we will identify what we're transferring. And so in this case, we'll identify that we are transferring azaleas, and we're transferring them from our consigned locator, and we'll just put them into our default locator, and that we are going to take 250. That would leave 750 in consigned. It would give us the ownership of 250, at which point we have a financial transaction and also a liability to our vendor for that amount. We'll go ahead and save this transaction and complete it. The completion of this is what will make the move of the materials. And at this point, I can also generate an invoice from the consigned transfer. So this will create an accounts payable for us, an invoice that we can then process through for the 250 units that we have used. If we come back to warehouse and locators at this point and look in the distribution center in our consigned location, under the storage tab, we'll see that we now only have 750 azalea bushes in our consigned locator. The 250 bushes that we moved are now into the regular inventory, and the financial transactions have taken place. Now, there are situations where we need to return materials to the vendor. If we have not gone through the consigned inventory transfer process, we simply would just do a regular return to vendor transaction, as is typical within CompTIA. If, for example, we had taken ownership of those and we need to move them and we want to send them back to the vendor, we would actually have to run a new process called return to consigned, which would allow us to take them out of inventory, put them back into consigned. It reverses out the invoice and then allows us to do the return to vendor transaction to our vendor with that material. This concludes the overview of the new feature for consigned inventory in CompTIA 3.7.